and welcome to another episode of But Is It Gothic? I'm Lauren and this is Mary and we are the Ghoul Guides. But Is It Gothic is a show in which we each present a case for a thing, be it text, phenomenon, event in history, really anything you can think of, and argue that we can consider that it is Gothic. And today's case will be presented to us by Mary, and this is something that is very personal to you.
It's very close to my heart. I talk about this a lot. Not always about it being Gothic, but today it will be about why this particular thing is Gothic, and I think I have a really good case.
I don't know anything. I know the broad strokes of why you probably are going to say that it's Gothic from conversations that we've had, but I actually am really excited because I don't know. I'm excited for you to spin me this tale.
Okay, cool.
I don't know.
With no more ado, I am talking about why Essex is Gothic. Generic Southern accent aside, I'm originally from Essex, and currently I'm filming this video.
You are literally
in Essex,
right at this very moment. You are an Essex girl.
Well, yeah, and I know I don't have that kind of stereotypical Essex girl look, which we will get into. But yes, this is what an Essex girl looks like. Before we get started though, Lauren, I actually do want to, just ask you, what do you know about Essex? Like, what comes to mind when I say Essex?
When you say Essex, I really like it when people say girls instead of girls. That really, I love that.
Yeah. We can be the Ghoul Guide.
I also like it when you say sauce. That really pleases me. Yeah. So being from the East Midlands, or as you would call it, the North.
Yeah. It's above the M25.
Yeah, I don't have that much knowledge of Essex.
Mm-hmm.
I tried and did not finish the Essex Serpent. I did not watch the Anyways Essex, but as every millennial living in the UK, I am culturally aware of it.
Aware of Tabby. Yep.
And I am familiar with the Essex stereotype.
Yeah.
I know that it's an estuary town. I know that it's near London.
Well, I'm from an estuary town. Essex is one of the biggest counties.
I was gonna say, I know it's a huge county.
So not all of it. So basically when we say estuary, it just means like on a river. So I can see the River Thames from my house, and I can also see Kent from my house. We won't go into that.
Yeah. I guess that's kind of my main knowledge. I know it's a big county. I know that parts of it are very rural.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's really the extent of my knowledge.
So fun Essex trivia just before we get into the Gothic stuff, just because I love talking about Essex. The Prodigy, Braintree in Essex. Jessie J, she's from Romford in Essex. Dougie from McFly.
The best member of McFly.
Because he's from Corringham in Essex. Russell Brand from Grays, let me say that right with my accent. Russell Brand is from Grays, which is currently where I am. So that's my hometown. It has the largest coastline in the UK at 350 miles. So
I'm jealous because we have no coastline because Nottinghamshire is completely landlocked.
It is.
Do you not believe that Russell Crowe movie when they ride that Robin Hood movie when they're like, let's get to the coast, and then they're there in like 2 hours on a horse?
It is something that I do miss when I'm in Sheffield. I'm right on the estuary. Obviously, there's lots of coastline, but also like a couple of like half an hour away from Southend, which is a nice kind of Southend-on-Sea. Technically, it's also on the estuary, so it should be Southend-on-Estuary, but Southend-on-Sea, whatever. Which also is home to the world's longest pleasure pier.
Wow.
So just off the top of the back, some Essex trivia for you.
So it really has if you wanted to visit England and see some of the kind of if you were really interested in English geography, Essex is the place to go to get it all, to get a nice little sampling.
Yes, yeah. There's it's very flat, so that we don't have a lot of mountains or that kind of stuff. Like there's nothing like the Peak District here, but there's lots of rural areas, lots of coastline. You've got what I call like the London parts of Essex, which a lot of them are on the kind of Thames, and then you've got the more like seaside parts of Essex, which are just delightful. But yeah, that's actually perfect way to get onto why Essex is Gothic, because we're going to go back to the beginning. The beginning of Essex and the beginning of England, to kind of unearth its Gothic foundations.
United English history is one of my many
yes. Okay, so let's get started. Okay. So one thing to bear in mind about Britain is that its history is made up of like many distinct groups. You've got the Scots, the Saxons, the Cornish, the Celts, all of these things, and they're all constantly fighting with each other. And just FYI, everyone hates the English. Whatever groups form the English, everyone hates the English. The Welsh, the Scottish, the Irish, and the English hate the English. And I think it's part of...
Ask the Cornish.
But I think it's partly comes from this kind of tribal history of it. But yeah, the foundation of England, therefore, is a kind of Gothic foundation of war and conflict that's around the kind of creation of like a national identity or national identities with these distinct groups. And this past continues to haunt the present. One of these layers is, importantly, Essex, or should that be the Kingdom of Essex, or perhaps maybe the Kingdom of East Saxons. So the Kingdom of Essex was one of the 7 kingdoms of the Anglo-Saxon heptarchy. I don't know.
Worth noting, Anglo-Saxon is a contentious term.
Yes, sure. Yeah.
We're all of these
terms. I'm just using this for ease.
We're using it for simplicity, but
because Essex is definitely more associated with kind of Saxons. So we can.
If you're interested in the history of the term Anglo-Saxon, there's some really great scholarship going on right now. But yeah, we're going to use it for ease. It's a Saxon kingdom. That's what's important.
And that is incredibly important because the Kingdom of East Saxons became Essex, and it's also kind of a pun on the kind of the 3 knives of Essex that become the kind of Essex crest. That I think I sent you a picture, Laura, and I'll try and put it up of Esquine, the first king of Essex, and you can see on his shield that's the crest of Essex, and it's got these 3 knives on them, and it's a kind of pun on Saxon. They're kind of pronounced either Siax or Siax or Six, so it's the Kingdom of East Siax. So you can kind of see like where that kind of term like Essex comes from. And also, if you look at this picture of Esquine, I'm not convinced that he was like actually that big. No.
I mean, that's a big sword.
It's a big sword. It's a big shield. But I just want it noted, this isn't a documentary picture. And I've personally seen like no evidence that Essex was founded by a nation of giants.
He looks like the armored ghost from Castle of Otranto. Like with the feathers in the helmet, like waving.
which I think you can see kind of does feed into that kind of Gothic nostalgia for that kind of military and chivalric kind of conflict and tied to war. And the other thing is, why is Essex, or the Kingdom of East Saxon, however you want to call it, why is it so important? So it's a coastal kingdom, which means that it's connected to various parts of Europe, which means that it's also open to invasion, and also easily invaded, but also it becomes a kind of important military post. So the capital of Essex is Colchester, which is Britain's oldest town. So before London became a thing, it was all about Colchester. And it was constantly being fought over by people who invaded Britain. So obviously you had the Romans. When the Romans came over, they created a kind of military outpost. And then when you have the kind of when the Normans invaded, it was essentially like rinse and repeat, and they turned it into theirs. And who sacked the Roman town of Colchester was Boudicca. Or Boadicea. I don't know. Is it Boudicca?
I usually say Boudica.
Boudicca.
I honestly don't know if that's right. I was taught Boudica. It's a long time since I've had someone else teach me about ancient Britain. This is the problem when you do your own research. You read things,
you don't know how to pronounce them,
and then you don't know how to pronounce them, and then you turn up, as you guys all heard during our Claremont episode. Then when you have to talk about them, you're like, I think this is how you say it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to say
parallel between Alaric's sacking of Rome and kind of our Gothic, our history of the term Gothic. Alaric sacks Rome in the 4th century, and that's where we get Gothic as a concept coming from. And we have Boudicca sacking Colchester around the same time, a bit earlier. I'm hazy on the dates as well. Not a date person, but like what you say, I think there's so many parallels and just such a rich kind of history of military conflict, and specifically being tied to ownership of a piece of land or of a nation, and then also the creation of a national identity, which I think is so integral to so many Gothic novels. And I think that this past Boudicca is much earlier. It's like 1st century AD.
Okay.
It's fine. What's a couple of hundred years?
Oh yeah, give or take. Well, it's basically a couple of years apart. But yeah, so that's basically the Gothic foundations of Essex, and of course every Gothic backdrop needs its Gothic furnishings, like castles.
Yeah.
Essex has plenty of castles, lots of castles. But let's say with Colchester, and let's focus on Colchester Castle, which is probably one of the most famous or most well-known, most notable castles in Essex, and also probably the UK.
Colchester is one of the many places that claims to be the most, I do know this having worked in another location, that claim to be the most haunted. I believe Colchester Castle is one of those places that claims it's the most haunted in England. And no, it's very popular with ghost hunters.
It is indeed. So Colchester Castle was built by the Normans, but on the foundations of a Roman temple, which I think is incredibly spooky.
That's really cool.
And so like all good Gothic castles, it has a very layered history, and every kind of period of history just adds more layers and adds more ghosts. Essentially, there's more kind of it's like more history to pull your ghost from. Yeah, exactly.
A ghostly snowball
made of ghosts. So I'm going to get onto
imagining a snowball made of ghosts now.
It's we'll come back to that. I think maybe
love it.
Snowball made of ghosts. Incredibly Gothic. But one of these layers I'll get to in a minute. It's the bewitching layers. But I want to take this time to mention that even in this time of COVID, you can still digitally visit Colchester Castle. And you can personally, online, sure, not in person, but you can check out its Gothic credentials. And that is thanks to our very favourite online paranormal investigators, the Ghoul Boys.
The Ghoul Boys.
So BuzzFeed Unsolved, in their kind of UK trip, Shane and Ryan visit Colchester Castle, and they do a whole episode there, and it is very entertaining.
It's one of the best episodes.
It gives everyone the delightful pronunciation of Essex.
According to Ghoul Boy himself, Ryan Bergara, it's Essex, which I have teased Mary with for about 2 years now. I came back to Essex.
And when I think it's delightful. So if you're watching Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan Bagara. We should just say that every episode.
Thank you, Ryan. Yeah, but basically Ryan says spooky castle, that's every investigator's dream, and yes it is, and it's also every gothicist's dream. So I mean, come on, Essex is Gothic, it's got this spooky castle.
Yeah, that's like a strong, I mean, you're only in like, we're not even at the first millennium yet. I'm already like, yeah, probs.
Yeah, probs, whatever. So yeah, as well as protecting against invasion, because that's the primary purpose of a castle, protecting against invasion and also asserting dominance and control over the surrounding lands and people. Colchester Castle was also used as a prison. So it held prisoners of war, more ghosts, but also witches. Which brings me to my next point, and that is that Essex is witching county.
It is indeed.
It is
this
indeed.
Is the only other thing I know about Essex.
Well, yeah. So as you might know, it's claimed that more witches were killed in Essex than in any other county. So there were a lot of witches that were killed in Essex alone, and it's also unfortunately the hunting ground for Matthew Hopkins, also known as the Witchfinder General. And according to Hopkins' own works, this can also be traced. His witch hunting journey can be traced, the origins are in Essex. So in his The Discovery of Witches, a publication that he writes towards the end of his career, and it's published in 1647. So we are skipping ahead quite a lot of history, but you can just picture that kind of snowball of ghosts and just imagine that in between is also Gothic.
picking up more supernatural entities as it goes along.
Exactly. So yeah, he writes that he was inspired to begin his witch hunting career in Manningtree in Essex. So I'll just read out a little quote that he says, and he's talking about himself in a weird third person title, whatever.
Hopkins' ego is something that I think has been long discussed.
Oh yeah,
and will probably become extremely clear when you read this quote. I don't even know what quote you're going to read, but I imagine it will show that.
The discoverer, which is Hopkins, never travelled far, but in March 1644 he had some 7 or 8 of that horrible sect of witches living in the town where he lived, a town in Essex called Manningtree, with diverse other adjacent witches of other towns, who every 6 weeks in the night, being always on the Friday night, had their meeting close by his house, and had their several solemn sacrifices there offered to the devil, one of which this discoverer heard speaking to her imps one night. So basically, in his weird third-person egotistical prose, he's saying, I was in an inn close to where I live, and I saw all these people, and they were witches, and they were talking to the devil, and also talking to their imps.
As one does.
That's one of the things that Hopkins like kind of witch hunting career is famous for, in that kind of focus on evidence, getting evidence, whether it be an imp or a familiar, or a kind of witch's mark, or some other kind of bodily evidence. And often the people who were accused by him and by people associated with him of being witches were taken to Colchester, and they were inspected for witches' marks or other kinds of things. And that's that's something that he kind of brought to the kind of early modern period of witch hunts. His career spanned from 1644 to 1647, so not actually a long time. And it did eventually spill into other areas such as Kent. So he spent a lot of time in Essex, but he did Essex, but he did go to other counties. And in this very short period, it's claimed that he's responsible for at least 100 deaths of people accused of witchcraft, maybe a lot more. But if you're getting
spawned a lot more, like his
100%,
his impact is so much bigger than
his impact is so big. And I'll get to that in a minute. But just, I mean, you know, if you want to talk about egotistical serial killer vibes,
yeah.
I mean, he's just he calls himself the Witchfinder General. You don't get to give yourself your own nickname. Like that's just a
not
thing.
how it works. You just wake up one day and be like, "No, Witchfinder General."
Like I can't declare myself the Witch Queen of Antifa. I mean, I could. Maybe I will, but
I'm gonna declare myself Chief Goth of Nottingham.
I like it. But this guy basically went around Essex for a period of what is that, like 3 years, accusing people of witchcraft, killing people, imprisoning people, and then he died not long after that. Allegedly, he was 28 when he died, which for me, as someone who's also 28 at the moment, it's weird to think that I mean, is it, how productive have I been in my career? I'm kind of glad that I haven't killed all these people, but also what do I have to show for my life? This is a weird kind of reflection.
Yeah.
Bit morbid.
It's funny though, isn't it? Because Hopkins spawns a lot of spawns his own Gothic trope, and you get a lot of those kind of like, I mean, even characters like Van Helsing, you know, that kind of like burdened with glorious purpose, going around healing the land, uncovering dark doings. But usually they're always imagined as much older, and I think even in the film, based on Hopkins, he's much older than that. And I think it's one of those interesting kind of removals from the possible reality, because we don't know for certain that is true, but that we think of the Witchfinder General as being this kind of like grizzled old man who's seen some shit. Well, and it's actually maybe this 27, like, what would he, if he died at 28, then he would have started in his early 20s, who's just kind of like, I think those are witches. Possible incel, man. Like, one has to wonder if he was just like, those girls, they won't talk to me.
Oh, 100% getting massive like incel vibes of this guy. Like that kind of incel is the exact right word, and I think we can read him through a kind of serial killer lens and that kind of, you know, narcissistic, just misogynistic.
And we get a lot of that in the Gothic, a lot of that kind of, I'm thinking of things like fundamental misunderstanding of religious texts.
Yes. So this is one of, so another
belief, that kind of like sociopathic misinterpretation of religion, that you are somehow blessed and it is your divine duty to commit mass murder in the name of some
100%. He's very much the character of Hopkins has become a kind of investigator figure, partly because he did lead the kind of charge to investigate and come up with evidence. But the other thing that he is really important, and that's really important to his legacy, is the importance of Protestantism and Puritanism in kind of undergirding this kind of persecution. So I've discussed this elsewhere, that he influences a specific kind of Puritan strain of witch hunts. And on the title page of his publication, The Discovery of Witches, is the King James translation of Exodus 22:18, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live," which is from the King James. I think it was published in 1611. Incredibly influential text. But Hopkins specifically tied that, and he wasn't alone. There are other kind of strains, religious strains of persecuting witches that you can find, but he specifically takes this Bible verse and ties it to his work, the work that he has to do. And after his death, witch hunts continued, and they were also exported to Britain, to America from Britain. Which, you know, you have the Salem witch trials, which were horrific and incredibly influenced by this kind of religious Puritan strain, and that is one of his many unfortunate, terrible, bloody influences.
Legacies.
And I like that you mentioned, I think you were talking about the Vincent Price film.
Yes.
From 1968. Horror legend Vincent Price, but definitely not looking like a 28-year-old man. But he's that film, I think, is incredibly influential in the kind of personality cult that we know of Matthew Hopkins and the Witchfinder General. Using his title. Why use his title? That's he gave himself that. No.
Yeah, no one gave. I think there's that assumption, isn't there, that if you're walking around going from town to town, saying I'm here to hunt the witches, that you've been sent by a higher, like, I mean, he probably potentially did believe himself to be sent by a higher power, but I guess there's that assumption, isn't there? If someone walks into town and is like, I'm the Witchfinder General, and you're like, well, either the king or the archbishop's probably sent you. And I think we've sustained that belief that someone must have been like, you, Hopkins, are the Witchfinder General. Not that, like, one day over his 17th century Cheerios, he was like, I'm going to be the Witchfinder General.
I would really love a book or a film version of Matthew Hopkins, but through that kind of incel lens that completely strips him of any kind
Hollywood, give us some money.
Give us, I'm me and Lauren happy to consult, produce that film. But yeah, he also, his legacy is almost innumerable. He crops up all the time, and it's hard, I think, to talk about witches, and especially when you're talking about English witches, and especially when you're talking about English witches in Essex, to not think of the Witchfinder General.
Well, outside of the Pendle trials, Essex probably is the most famous and well known. And the Pendle trials are perhaps only as famous as they are because they're so kind of contentious and conflicted and complicated. I mean, it's a very important moment in history, and there's some really good work done on Pendle, but that's a very contained incident in terms of, when you uncover that, there's a lot there outside. But this is kind of, if we're talking about a sustained persecution of witches and witchcraft, then Hopkins is the single most famous in English history, and that is explicitly tied to Essex because that's his hunting ground.
It's his hunting ground. It's where he starts. It's where he's from. And the reason that he went and specifically went looking for evidence, or came up with all these kinds of weird evidences and ways to find witches, is because of the Pendle trials, because there was a distinct lack of evidence. Although, I mean, I'm using that word very loosely because I don't believe that he had evidence of witches. But
but he creates that idea that evidence was important, and that kind of comes up again in Salem, doesn't it? Like, it does. That evidence is something that is crucial here. Be it fabricated or otherwise.
Exactly. So he is
cool.
He is an incredibly important figure, and he also crops up more recently in the Witch Books of Essex author Sid Moore. So anyone who knows me, and Lauren, you know about me, I love Sid's book. Sid Moore are just so good. They're basically a really fabulous blend of Gothic and witches and unapologetic feminism, which is just so my thing.
I mean, just when you showed them to me the first time and I looked at the covers and read the blurbs, I was like, are you sure you didn't commission these yourself?
So I have here one of my copies of the first book in Sid Moore's Essex Witch Museum series, which I just think are just so beautiful.
Go like that so you can see the shine.
Oh
yeah,
so they're shiny, and
we love a shiny book cover.
They have skulls, and the tagline for them is "The only way is witchcraft." I just think the covers are so gorgeous and the content is just so great, and why they're important for this particular case that I'm making about Essex as Gothic is because the stories are specifically tied to locations in Essex, such as Southend and Leigh-on-Sea, and other places as well. And I also really like that Sid Moore connects the witch stereotype to the more contemporary Essex girl stereotype. So that is something that you said that you remembered, that you thought of, that is about Essex. And I love the way that Sidmore kind of weaves these two together. So she says about this, it's my theory that despite memories of the witch hunt fading, the reputation of the county's women never really recovered, which is why when the Essex girl reared her flossy blonde head, she was taken up so quickly and decisively. And elsewhere, Sidmore has talked about the idea of glamour. So that witches are powerful women who use magic and glamour to bewitch men and to do things. And if you think about the Essex girl stereotype, you think glamorous, these beautiful women, and their magic isn't supernatural anymore. It's tied to their ability to transform their faces, transform their hair. They can become these glamorous, beautiful women who can bewitch men. And I guess essentially take all their money is the threat of Essex girls. But also, also part of this is they're constructed to denigrate women and to denigrate powerful women. So if you go back to the kind of Hopkins era, people who were kind of persecuted for being witches, they were cunning women. Women who were in midwifery or who had skills or were widows, or single women, or these kinds of people who didn't necessarily need men and had their own kind of careers or had different kinds of powers and needed to be controlled and dominated by the incel.
Which is interesting because our non-UK viewers might not be aware of the Only Way is Essex, but there was a whole kind of snobby backlash against the Only Way of Essex because they were portrayed as being vapid and stupid, but almost all of the women on that show were either independent businesswomen. They had their own branding. They were very savvy, powerful, career-driven women, but because they were blonde Essex girls who were maybe a bit ditzy or presented. I think the important thing to remember about the Only Way is Essex is heavily presented to be a certain way, but almost all of them were independent even before the show started.
100%. And this is my personal kind of side crusade in even though I'm not a kind of stereotypical Essex girl, I will defend anyone who is who wants to embrace that more stereotypical Essex girl type, because I think that it is important to recognize that, like you say, these women are intelligent, independent business women, sometimes. So for our kind of international audiences, you might want to think maybe in terms of a parallel of the Kardashians, or something like Jersey Shore, where you have these women.
The Only Way is Essex was very much then we had Geordie Shore, but the Only Way is Essex is very much a parallel to the Jersey Shore.
Exactly. And you have these women who are beautiful and they're educated just in a different way. And they are incredibly successful. They have amazing business prowess and marketing ability. And they can, so what if the product is themselves? Who cares? They're successful.
There's also that thing as well, isn't there, that that doesn't have to be the case. You don't have to, if you want to indulge in that aesthetic, you don't have to be any particular way. It's just important to recognize that a lot of this binary of all this kind of is patriarchal bullshit. But yes,
100%.
I think it's really cool that from what you told me about these books, that they don't, a lot of kind of early 2000s YA Gothic leaned into that kind of, she's blonde and beautiful and all the boys like her, but I'm dark and mysterious and I'm intelligent, and that is a really harmful stereotype. I think it's really cool that now we've got Gothic fiction that is pushing back against that and is kind of embracing a more inclusive and a more sisterhood feminist approach rather than that kind of harmful divisionary, which is also bullshit. It doesn't make a difference how we dress and what colour hair we have.
Well, this is my kind of personal side crusade that I'm doing alongside the PhD, and I think that it's really important that not everyone from Essex ascribes that stereotype. You know, I'm from Essex and I don't have blonde hair. I don't wear like white stiletto heels, but I'm still from Essex. But also, I think it's equally important to say that if you are from Essex and you have blonde hair and you wear white stiletto heels and you ascribe to that kind of glamour look, that doesn't make you any less intelligent. And I look at, you know, so what if you're not book smart? If you can own your own salon and
man,
and like have all these amazing talents with like hair and nails and beauty stuff like that, that's amazing. And if you're a businesswoman, and I think that that's great. And that is what I think Sidmore's books do. They very much kind of shatter that kind of gendered and class kind of critique of the Essex girl stereotype, and show that actually, you know, Essex girls can be smart. Why would they not be? And they're great. They're pretty great.
Which is interesting because like the Gothic traditionally does play into that kind of Burkean, you can only be beautiful if you don't acknowledge your own beauty, which is very harming. And a lot of both male and female Ortho Gothic does that, but it also does kind of sidestep it. And I think that's an interesting continuation of that sort of recognition of female agency being over one's appearance, one's personality, one's future, as well as your thought and your education and things like that. So that is a really interesting kind of Gothic narrative, I suppose, in that kind of the Gothic's ongoing tension between female beauty and female worth and female agency and female appearance. You know, we've talked before about things like the trifecta of the Virgin, the Crone, and the Whore, and you know, we've talked about kind of how the heroine's perceived. But yeah, that's a really, I had not thought about that, but that's a really interesting thing that is inherently tied to Essex because of that history of witchcraft and that negative stereotype that has been both vilified and reclaimed in the media, kind of in tandem. That links really closely with Gothic history.
Yeah, and I think Sidmore does that really well. So her novels are basically Gothic crime novels. So her Essex protagonists, often Essex girls, investigate crimes or sometimes hauntings that are linked to Essex's spooky past, because you know it's very spooky, and also their witchy past. And in one novel, so not from the Essex Witch Museum series, but she has some other novels before that, one of which is called Witch Hunt. Matthew Hopkins himself features in them. And Moore uses a really interesting kind of fictional theory. So it's, well, I mean, it's not real, or is it? About maybe the fact that Matthew Hopkins didn't die. And maybe, I mean, you'll have to read the novel to find out this kind of theory, because it's such a good novel. But that's called Witch Hunt. But the main point of that novel isn't about Matthew Hopkins, and often it's not really about but more it's the women who were accused of witchcraft take center stage. So the focus is on, even in that book with Matthew Hopkins, the focus is on the Essex protagonist and the women who were killed, and it's tied to Essex. So you have Great Lees Anne Hughes and Ursula Kemp from St. Osyth. So these are kind of real locations in Essex that more like weaves into her kind of fictional narrative. And I just think that it's just so fascinating to kind of uncover Essex's Gothic and witchy past, but tying it to this kind of contemporary idea of the Essex girl, and seeing how the two actually have always been connected. And that's why I think they're great, and that's why I think everyone should go and read.
Okay, so we've got some history, we've got some contemporary fiction, we've got some supernatural, we've got some architectural Gothic.
Yep.
I mean, that's pretty much ticking most of the available Gothic boxes on the form.
Well, hold your horses, because I have saved the best till last. And I mean, you know, I personally think you should be convinced that Essex is Gothic now. But if you are not, then let's bring in some kind of Gothic celebrity into
Are we going canon? Are we going canon? Is that happening?
We are going canon. We are going back to the 19th century, and we're going back to Dracula. So for my final point, I'm just going to talk about Dracula, because for those of you who might not know, I bang on about it all the time. Dracula comes to Essex.
So this is an extract from Stoker's novel describing Dracula's journey, or at least the journey of his boxes of dirt, from Whitby to London. So basically, in a letter dated the 17th of August, Samuel F. Billington and Son, who are solicitors at Whitby, write to Messrs. Carter, Patterson and Co. in London. And their letter begins, "Dear Sirs, herewith please receive invoice of goods sent by Great Northern Railway. Same are to be delivered at Carfax, near Purfleet, immediately on receipt at goods station King's Cross. The house is at present empty, but enclosed please find keys, all of which are labelled."
Dracula comes from Transylvania via Whitby to Essex. I think I've mentioned elsewhere, but I think it's just really important to put Essex on the map, because thank you, the film starring Keanu Reeves, who puts this space as London. No. So let's take it back to the novel. Let's take it back to the novel. And let's take it back to Purfleet. So basically, you've got all these boxes of dirt. Dracula doesn't travel light. He's got like 50 odd boxes of dirt. And he's traveling, he's come a long way. He's been on a boat, he's been on a train, gets a cart from London. Where does his cart turn up? It's Purfleet. He comes to Purfleet, and he comes to a little, well, I say little, basically a kind of an abbey, Carfax House, which was based on Purfleet House in Essex, which is in, so Purfleet is like the town next to us in Grays, and it's on the estuary as well, which my mum made this really great point. Why were these boxes of earth not transported via the Thames? Because it was
always wondered that.
Yeah.
Why didn't he go down why didn't he get on another boat?
Why didn't he get on another boat and just go from London to Purfleet? Because Purfleet is a docking town. Would have had the docks. And also Purfleet in the 19th century, so it would not have been as built up as it is now. It would have been a kind of smallerish town, little town, and it had a railway. And everyone knows that railways and trains are super important to Dracula. So when Jonathan Harker is travelling to Transylvania, the trains get slower and more unreliable. Because the point is he's going back into kind of, medieval Europe, back in time, back to the past. But in England, the trains always run on time. And trains are very... they did not anymore. But the trains always run in time, and it's a connection between places, so it's a connection from London. It's a symbol of modernity, and it's a connection of between London and Whitby, between London and Wales, and between London and Purfleet. Purfleet is just outside of London, and it's not as well built up. And if you were a 100 years old vampiric count who was looking to move, looking for some real estate,
probably wouldn't choose a cart, the slowest form of transport.
Well, no. You might choose a train, you might choose a boat, but traveling from London to Purfleet, you're looking at, I don't know, maybe half an hour's journey. But you'd have more people involved. You'd have to have someone to get you onto the boat, or you'd have to have someone to get you onto the car. Yeah. So just having someone put you on a car and then take you you've got door-to-door service, and then also
taxi.
Exactly, dirt taxi. But also I think it means that there's more of a paper trail and there's more people that you can talk to. So I just think it was just convenient for Stoker. But yeah, you have Carfax House, Purfleet House, and Purfleet House would have had, in Essex, built by Samuel Whitbread of the brewing fame or whatever, built this kind of house, and it had a chapel attached to it, which is exactly what Carfax House has. And it would have been obviously, like I say, not as well populated as it is now, overlooking, separated by a wall, so you couldn't see it from on side, but if you went up to the wall you would see Ordinance House, because there's another really important location in Dracula that's also set in Essex, and that is Dr. Seward's mental asylum. So I'm basing all of this on local Essex and Thurrock historian Jonathan Catton's work. He did some really great work uncovering these kinds of Dracula connections. And his theory is that Ordinance House would have been what Stoker would have been looking at and thinking, great, I've got big house with a chapel on one side, and I've got another big house on the other side that could have that kind of asylum vibe. We're close to the river, so you've got good connections if you want to get
Imagine
out.
looking at a house. Imagine the people that lived in that house, and they were like, "What's wrong with that house?" Like...
So Ordinance House was basically a military post.
Okay.
So Purfleet was kind of a military town as well, a barrack, yeah. And across the river in Kent, they'd make loads of explosives, and they'd take them over the river to Ordnance House and all the magazine storages. So there were 5 magazines. Now all Ordnance House and 4 of those magazines have been turned into houses. They're not there anymore. But you can go to the kind of local Thurrock Museum if you want to. It's in the magazine number 5, and it does have a little bit on Dracula. But yeah, I just think that it's really interesting to think
that you have that physicality.
You have that physicality, yeah. And I actually, back home in Essex, went to a little visit the other day. We went round. And of course I did. But yeah, it's so interesting. They are like Purfleet House isn't there anymore either. There's a church called St. Stephen's, which has been built with that brick. But you can kind of see the foundations of the kind of what would have been Carfax House, and talking to the lovely people that work there, and the priests and the reverends, and say how they have some of the silverware from the chapel, from Samuel Whitbread's chapel, still intact in the church. But yeah, it's also incredibly idyllic. So I can 100% imagine Stoker wanting a day out from London. And this is what's really important, that it's not in London. It would have taken a day out in London, and it was a kind of town with an established train station.
So it would be easy to reach for like a day out, kind of.
Easy to reach for a day out.
And you kind of get
Stoker
that.
And for Seward.
And we know that that's the thing, like, I mean, for those of you that have read the Essex Serpent, like, that's one of the things that comes up in that, is that Essex is this place that you can go that's, you don't have to go, you can go overnight, but you're still close enough to London, like, to have that kind of fresh air and rural escape.
And that's exactly what you can still find today. It's on the estuary, so you've got beautiful like river scenes. You can see Kent over the way.
Are you sure that this is you arguing that Essex is Gothic and not a covert tourism advert for Essex?
Come to Essex. We have castles, we have Dracula,
Mary,
we
you
have
getting some money from the Essex Council that I don't know about.
I wish. No, I'm just very passionate about my home county, and I think that everyone should see all of the amazing, wonderful Gothicness of Essex, but also I think that it is Gothic, and that is my case, and I think that I win.
Okay. I mean, I genuinely don't think I can argue with that, because a lot of my work is about England's creation as a nation and the idea of England's legacy.
Mm-hmm.
So anything, the Saxon kingdoms become a really important part of England's concept of its own nationhood. And this is why I mentioned the thing about Anglo-Saxon, because England mythologizes itself.
Exactly.
In the 18th century, it creates this history that doesn't exist. And this is where this idea of Anglo-Saxon comes from. It's not a thing. You had Saxons, Angles, Normans, Vikings, you had the girls, it's not a thing. But this, this homogenous myth that comes out, kingdoms like Essex are really important. And, like what you were saying about the shield, and like this kind of almost supernatural founding of these kingdoms. So you have that, you have the Witchfinder General.
yeah not just witches, but the Witchfinder General.
But like you said, you've got all of this conquest and invasion, this melting pot of different cultures. You have things built over things that are built over things. You have this kind of this very complex history that leads to someone at whatever, like 25 years old, being like, I'm gonna hunt witches, they definitely exist here. That leaving a massive kind of scar on national and local history, leading to a whole host of fiction, a whole host of copycats. You've got canonical Gothic fiction, you've got contemporary Gothic fiction, you've got gender anxiety, class anxiety. I have to give you that one. I mean, I was willing to give you that one, but case well presented. The Hopkins would be impressed, because the evidence about
to be honest, I think I've done a much better job than Hopkins, because I actually have evidence. I didn't make any of this stuff up. Like I say, you can go
You're just challenging Hopkins Ghost. Tonight, Hopkins Ghost is going to appear at your bedside and be like, debate me.
I will debate him. You know what? Fine, I will debate him as the Witch Queen of Antifa. I will 100% debate incel Matthew Hopkins.
Yes. Cool.
But yeah. I mean,
well, if you know any other Gothic tidbits about Essex that we might have missed, then you can find us on Twitter at the Ghoul Guides.
Please do let me know if you have any other Essex Gothic fun facts. Yes. I'm always collecting them.
Yes. Or you can comment on the video below. And in the meantime, we have been the Ghoul Guides. I'm Lauren, and this is Mary. Stay safe and stay spooky.